Sometimes the person you regret losing the most is already fighting for their life before you even realize they're gone. Daniel Whitmore barely looked up from the contract in front of him, as 6 attorneys waited in complete silence around the polished conference table on the 82nd floor of Whitmore Global Tower in downtown Chicago. Outside the glass walls, cold November rain blurred the skyline into streaks of gray light, but inside the room, everything was controlled, precise, and worth nearly $2 billion. Daniel adjusted the cuff of his navy suit and reached for the silver pen beside his coffee when his phone suddenly vibrated across the table. He almost ignored it. Almost. Unknown number. He declined the call without thinking, but 2 seconds later it rang again. One of the lawyers shifted awkwardly. Daniel frowned and answered with visible irritation. "This better be important." A calm female voice responded immediately. "Mr. Whitmore? This is Mercy General Hospital. Your name was listed as the emergency contact for a 6-year-old boy named Noah Carter." Daniel froze so suddenly the pen slipped from his fingers and rolled across the table. For a moment nobody spoke. The rain outside seemed louder now, tapping against the windows like distant static. "I think you have the wrong number," he said carefully. "I don't have a son." The woman hesitated. "Sir, the child's mother is Emily Carter." The name hit him harder than he expected. Emily Carter. The room around him disappeared. The lawyers. The contract. The skyline. Everything faded behind a memory he had spent years trying to bury. Emily laughing barefoot in his penthouse kitchen at midnight. Emily standing in the snow outside his office building, wearing that oversized cream-colored coat she loved. Emily crying the night she left him without explanation. Daniel slowly stood from his chair. His heartbeat uneven now. "What happened?" he asked quietly. "The boy collapsed at school earlier this morning," the nurse explained. "He's stable right now, but his mother was admitted shortly after arriving here. We needed to contact family." "Family?" Daniel pressed his hand against the edge of the table as confusion spread through him like ice water. Emily had vanished 6 years ago. No goodbye worth believing. No explanation that made sense. One day she was there and the next she was gone. He had searched for her at first, called everyone he knew, hired investigators for almost 3 months. But eventually his mother convinced him Emily had only wanted money and attention, and Daniel forced himself to move on. At least that's what he told himself. Yet somehow, after all these years, his name was still written down beside hers. "Sir?" the nurse asked gently. Daniel realized he hadn't spoken for several seconds. "I'm coming," he said. He ended the call and stared blankly at the dark screen in his hand. Across the table, one of the attorneys cleared his throat nervously. "Mr. Whitmore, the investors are waiting downstairs." Daniel looked toward the storm outside the windows before grabbing his coat. "Cancel everything." "Everything?" the attorney asked in disbelief. Daniel's jaw tightened as 1,000 unanswered questions crashed through his mind at once. Why would Emily list him as emergency contact? Why had she never told him about a child? And why did the boy have his last name written in the hospital file? As the elevator doors closed in front of him and the city lights reflected against the steel walls, Daniel Whitmore felt something he had not felt in years. Fear. Daniel Whitmore had spent years convincing himself that some people were meant to disappear forever. But the moment he walked into Mercy General Hospital, he realized Emily Carter had never truly left his mind at all. The elevator doors opened onto the pediatric floor, and the smell of antiseptic and stale coffee filled the quiet hallway. Nurses moved quickly beneath harsh white lights while televisions mounted near the ceiling played muted daytime talk shows no one was watching. Daniel adjusted his coat as he approached the front desk, suddenly aware that he looked completely out of place in a $10,000 suit surrounded by exhausted parents clutching paper cups and overnight bags. "I am here for Noah Carter," he said. The receptionist looked up immediately. "You are Mr. Whitmore." Daniel nodded slowly. She gave him a sympathetic expression that made his chest tighten unexpectedly. "Room 214. The boy is awake now." Awake. Daniel exhaled carefully and walked down the long hallway, each step feeling heavier than the last. He still did not understand what was happening. Emily had disappeared 6 years ago without warning. One cold February morning he woke up to an empty apartment, half her clothes missing, and a handwritten note that simply said, "I am sorry. Please do not look for me." At first he thought she was angry after the argument they had about his family. Then days passed. Then weeks. Eventually silence became permanent. Daniel stopped outside room 214 with his hand resting against the door. He did not know why his pulse felt so unsteady. Maybe because part of him was terrified to see Emily again. Or maybe because another part of him was terrified the child inside might actually belong to him. He slowly pushed the door open. A small boy sat upright in the hospital bed wearing blue dinosaur pajamas and holding a juice box with both hands. Brown hair, pale skin, serious gray eyes. Daniel felt the air leave his lungs instantly because the child looked exactly like the photographs of Daniel at that age stored inside his mother's Connecticut estate. The resemblance was impossible to ignore. The boy blinked at him curiously. "Are you the guy from the phone call?" he asked softly. Daniel could not speak for a second. I think so." The child studied him carefully. "You look familiar." Daniel stepped closer to the bed, unable to look away. Even the shape of the boy's smile felt painfully recognizable. "How are you feeling?" he finally asked. "Better." The boy shrugged slightly. "Mom got more sick than me though." Daniel's stomach tightened immediately. "Where is your mother?" "They moved her upstairs." Noah lowered his voice. "She told them not to call you." Daniel frowned. "Then why did they?" The boy pointed toward a small backpack sitting beside the chair near the window. "Because I told them your name." Daniel stared at him in confusion. "You know my name?" Noah nodded once. "Mom keeps your picture inside her wallet." The room suddenly felt too small. Daniel looked toward the backpack, then back at the little boy whose eyes mirrored his own almost perfectly. Questions crashed through his mind faster than he could process them. Emily had kept his picture all these years? Why would she hide a child from him? Why would she disappear only to secretly hold on to his memory? Noah twisted the straw wrapper nervously between his fingers before asking the question Daniel was not prepared to hear. "Are you really my dad?" Daniel felt his throat tighten as the question hung silently between them. "Are you really my dad?" For years he had negotiated billion-dollar acquisitions without hesitation, but nothing in his life had prepared him for a 6-year-old boy staring at him with hopeful eyes inside a hospital room. Daniel pulled the chair closer to the bed and sat down slowly. "Why do you think I might be your dad?" he asked carefully. Noah looked down at the juice box in his hands. "Because my mom cries when she looks at your picture sometimes." The words landed harder than Daniel expected. "And because I heard her talking about you when she thought I was asleep." Daniel could barely process what he was hearing. His chest felt strangely heavy now, filled with regret he could not yet fully explain. "What did she say?" Noah shrugged. "That you were a good person." Daniel looked away immediately. Emily had every reason to hate him after the way things ended. Or at least that was what he always believed. Yet somehow she had protected his image in front of their son all these years. Before Daniel could respond, the door opened quietly and an older nurse stepped inside holding a clipboard. "Mr. Whitmore?" Daniel stood. "Yes. The attending physician would like to speak with you upstairs regarding Miss Carter." Noah's small face tightened with worry immediately. "Is my mom okay?" The nurse smiled gently at him. "She is resting right now, sweetheart." Daniel noticed the uncertainty hidden behind her calm expression. Something was wrong. He could feel it. Noah grabbed Daniel's sleeve before he could leave. "You are not leaving, right?" The question caught him off guard because the boy sounded genuinely afraid. Daniel looked down at the small hand holding onto his coat. "No," he said quietly. "I am not leaving." Noah finally let go. Daniel followed the nurse upstairs to a quieter floor where the lights were dimmer and the air felt colder. Outside one of the rooms, the physician handed him a folder. "Are you immediate family?" the doctor asked. Daniel hesitated. "I do not know yet." The doctor gave him a tired look that suggested he had seen complicated situations like this before. "Miss Carter has been under significant physical and emotional stress for quite some time. According to her records, she delayed treatment because she could not afford to stop working." Daniel frowned. "Treatment for what?" The doctor paused briefly before answering. "A serious autoimmune condition. She has been managing it alone for years." "Alone?" Daniel closed his eyes for a moment as guilt slowly settled into his chest. Emily had been struggling all this time while he spent years believing she chose to disappear. "Why was I listed as emergency contact?" he asked quietly. The doctor opened the folder and pointed toward a form signed several months earlier. "Because despite everything, your name was the only one she wrote down." Daniel stared at Emily's handwriting across the paper. It was unmistakably hers. Clean, careful, familiar. Beneath the emergency contact section, one sentence had been written beside his name. "In case anything happens to me, please make sure Noah stays with his father." Daniel read the line twice before his breathing became uneven. He suddenly realized this was never just about a phone call from a hospital. Emily had trusted him with the most important person in her life, while believing she might not survive long enough to explain the truth herself. And standing there beneath the cold fluorescent lights, Daniel understood something that terrified him more than anything else. Emily had been preparing for goodbye. Daniel stood alone outside Emily's hospital room long after the doctor walked away. The hallway had gone quiet except for the distant hum of machines and the occasional sound of footsteps echoing across polished floors. In his hands was the folder, containing 6 years of a life he knew nothing about. Medical records, insurance denials, prescription lists, part-time employment forms from diners and grocery stores across Illinois. Daniel slowly flipped through the pages, and with every document, the weight in his chest grew heavier. Emily had worked at a roadside cafe in Joliet for nearly 3 years. After that, she cleaned offices during the night shift while raising Noah alone in a one-bedroom apartment, less than 600 square feet wide. Daniel stared at the address in disbelief. He owned penthouses larger than that apartment's entire floor. He could not understand how the woman he once loved enough to imagine marrying had struggled this much while he remained completely unaware. Then he saw the date on Noah's birth certificate. Daniel's hands tightened instantly. Noah had been born only 4 months after Emily disappeared from Chicago. 4 months. Which meant she already knew she was pregnant before she left him. Daniel leaned back against the wall slowly, trying to steady his breathing. "Why would you hide this from me?" he whispered under his breath. But deep down, another question terrified him even more. Why would Emily think she had to? He closed the folder and looked through the small glass window into Emily's room. She was asleep beneath pale hospital blankets, her face thinner than he remembered, her blonde hair slightly messy against the pillow. Even now she looked beautiful to him, but not in the polished way women at charity galas looked beautiful. Emily looked real, fragile, exhausted. Human. Daniel remembered the last night they spent together 6 years ago. His mother had invited Emily to dinner at the Whitmore estate in Connecticut. At first everything seemed polite, almost welcoming, until dessert arrived and the atmosphere changed completely. Victoria Whitmore had looked directly at Emily and calmly asked how much money she expected from Daniel once the relationship became serious. Daniel remembered Emily's face falling in silence. He remembered defending her at first, but not strongly enough. Not fast enough. By the end of the night, Emily barely spoke during the drive home. 2 days later she disappeared. Daniel always blamed himself for not stopping her. But standing outside this hospital room, he realized there had been far more happening beneath the surface than he ever understood. A quiet voice interrupted his thoughts. "She never stopped loving you, you know." Daniel turned to see a woman in blue scrubs standing beside the nurse's station. She looked around Emily's age. "I am Rachel," she said softly. "Emily and I worked together for years." Daniel swallowed hard. "Then maybe you can explain why she vanished without telling me I had a son." Rachel hesitated before answering. "Because someone made her believe your life would be destroyed if the truth came out." Daniel frowned immediately. "What does that mean?" Rachel crossed her arms tightly. "Emily showed me letters years ago. Messages from your family. Threats. Lawyers." Daniel's expression darkened. "My family would not do that." Rachel looked at him sadly. "Then why did Emily cry every night while holding a photo of you?" Daniel said nothing. Rachel stepped closer and lowered her voice. "She left because she thought protecting you mattered more than protecting herself." Daniel felt cold all over. For 6 years he believed Emily abandoned him without explanation, But now tiny pieces of the truth were beginning to surface in ways he could no longer ignore. And somewhere inside that truth was a reason Emily chose to suffer alone rather than ask him for help. Daniel barely slept that night. He remained in the hospital long after midnight, sitting alone in the dim waiting area outside Noah's room while rain continued falling against the windows overlooking downtown Chicago. Every few minutes he looked through the hallway toward Emily's floor, hoping for some kind of explanation that would make the last 6 years easier to understand. But nothing about this situation felt simple anymore. Around 2 in the morning, Noah wandered quietly into the hallway holding a worn gray blanket against his chest. His small sneakers squeaked softly across the polished floor as he approached Daniel. "I cannot sleep," he admitted. Daniel looked up immediately. "Bad dream?" Noah nodded slightly before climbing into the chair beside him. For a few seconds neither of them spoke. Daniel noticed the boy kept glancing at him carefully, as if trying to compare his face against memories he did not fully understand. "Mom says storms make hospitals feel lonely," Noah whispered while staring at the rain outside. Daniel swallowed hard. Emily used to say the exact same thing years ago whenever thunderstorms rolled across Chicago. He suddenly realized how much of her lived inside this child. "Your mom talks about me often?" Daniel asked carefully. Noah shrugged beneath the blanket. "Only when she thinks I am asleep." Daniel looked down at his hands. "What does she say?" Noah thought for a moment. "That you used to make pancakes at midnight." Daniel let out a quiet breath of disbelief because it was true. During their first apartment together, he used to wake Emily up after late meetings just to make chocolate chip pancakes while music played softly through the kitchen. Tiny memories he thought had disappeared forever were somehow still alive inside Emily's stories to their son. "She also said you liked old movies even though you pretend you do not." Daniel laughed quietly for the first time all night. "Your mother remembers too much." Noah smiled slightly before his expression changed again. "Are you really going to stay?" Daniel looked at the boy carefully. "Did people leave before?" Noah nodded once. "Mom's landlord. Her boss sometimes. Even family." The words hurt more than Daniel expected because Noah said them so casually, like disappointment had become normal in his short life. Daniel leaned forward slowly. "Listen to me, Noah. I am not going anywhere." The child stared at him for a long moment before finally relaxing against the chair. Just then a nurse hurried down the hallway toward them. "Mr. Whitmore?" Daniel stood immediately. "What happened?" "Miss Carter is awake," the nurse explained. "But she is asking for her son." Noah instantly grabbed Daniel's hand without thinking. Daniel looked down at their hands together in stunned silence before following the nurse upstairs. When they reached Emily's room, Daniel stopped outside the door. Through the small opening, he could see Emily sitting weakly against the hospital pillows while anxiously scanning the room. The moment Noah ran inside, relief flooded her exhausted face. She wrapped her arms around him carefully and closed her eyes as if simply feeling him safe beside her mattered more than anything else in the world. Then Emily looked up. Her entire body froze the second she saw Daniel standing in the doorway. For a few silent seconds neither of them moved. 6 years of pain, confusion, and unanswered questions filled the space between them. Emily looked pale and fragile beneath the fluorescent lights, but her blue eyes widened with unmistakable panic. "Daniel," she whispered. Daniel stepped into the room slowly, unable to look away from her. "You never told me about him." Emily's face drained of color completely. And in that exact moment, Daniel knew there was a truth she had been terrified for him to discover. Emily stared at Daniel as if seeing a ghost she had spent years trying to outrun. Noah remained beside her hospital bed holding her hand tightly, completely unaware of the storm building silently between the two adults. Daniel could see fear in Emily's eyes, but beneath it was something even more painful. Shame. "Noah," Emily said softly without looking away from Daniel, "can you give us 1 minute?" Noah hesitated immediately. "But you said you do not like hospitals alone." Emily forced a small smile. "I know, sweetheart. But Rachel is outside waiting with hot chocolate for you." Noah looked toward Daniel uncertainly before finally sliding off the bed. As he passed, Daniel instinctively stepped aside to let him through. The door closed softly behind them, leaving the room painfully quiet. For several seconds neither Daniel nor Emily spoke. The sound of rain tapping against the windows filled the silence between them. Finally, Daniel looked down at her chart resting near the bed before lifting his eyes back to hers. You let me believe you disappeared because you stopped loving me. Emily looked away instantly. It was easier that way. Daniel felt anger and heartbreak collide inside him at the same time. Easier for who? Emily's voice cracked slightly. For you. Daniel took a step closer. Emily, I missed 6 years of my son's life. Tears filled her eyes immediately. I know. Then tell me why. Emily pressed trembling fingers against the blanket as if trying to steady herself. Because your mother made it very clear that my child would destroy your future. Daniel froze. What? Emily swallowed hard before continuing. 2 days before I left Chicago, your mother came to my apartment. Daniel's expression darkened immediately. She told me you were about to become the youngest executive partner in your company's history, and that a pregnant waitress from the South Side would ruin everything. Daniel shook his head slowly in disbelief. She would not. Emily interrupted quietly. She offered me money to disappear. The room fell completely silent. Daniel stared at her, unable to process the words. Emily wiped at her eyes quickly before continuing. I refused at first. Then she showed me documents. What documents? Daniel asked. Contracts. Articles. Stories prepared for the media if our relationship became public. She said your board members would never trust you again if they thought you got a woman pregnant before marriage while trying to take over the company. Daniel felt sick. Emily? She told me you would resent me eventually, Emily whispered. And honestly, after that dinner at the estate, part of me believed her. Daniel looked away in pain. He remembered that dinner perfectly now. The silence during the drive home. The way Emily stared out the car window the entire night. He should have protected her. He should have fought harder. Why did you not tell me about Noah after he was born? Daniel asked quietly. Emily laughed bitterly through tears. Because every time I almost called you, another lawyer letter arrived reminding me to stay away. Daniel's eyes widened instantly. Lawyers. Emily nodded toward the drawer beside her bed. There is a box in there. Daniel opened it carefully and pulled out a stack of old envelopes tied together with faded ribbon. Every single one carried the Whitmore family legal seal. Daniel flipped through them with growing horror. Formal warnings. Confidential. Settlement offers. Demands to avoid contact. One letter even claimed Daniel personally requested no communication. I never saw these, he whispered. Emily looked at him sadly. I know that now. Daniel's chest tightened painfully as the truth finally began crashing into place. Someone had controlled the story from the very beginning. Someone had deliberately separated him from the woman he loved, and the child he never knew existed. And for the first time in 6 years, Daniel realized Emily had never abandoned him at all. Daniel sat beside Emily's hospital bed long after midnight while the city lights flickered beyond the rain-covered windows. The stack of legal letters remained untouched on the table between them like evidence from a life neither of them could get back. Emily looked exhausted now, her shoulders slightly trembling beneath the thin blanket as if years of carrying everything alone had finally become too heavy to hide. Daniel stared down at the old envelopes again before speaking quietly. All this time you thought I knew. Emily nodded weakly. At first I hated you for it. Her voice cracked slightly. Then after Noah was born, I stopped hating you because it hurt too much. Daniel closed his eyes briefly. Every memory from the past 6 years suddenly felt poisoned. Every holiday spent working late. Every empty penthouse. Every relationship he sabotaged because no woman ever felt like Emily. He thought he had been abandoned, but the truth was far worse. She had been pushed away while carrying his child completely alone. Why did you never try one last time? He asked softly. Emily looked toward the window. Because I saw your engagement announcement online 3 years after I left. Daniel frowned immediately. What engagement? Vanessa Sinclair, Emily answered quietly. Daniel let out a stunned breath. That was a business rumor invented by investors. We dated for maybe 2 months. Emily stared at him in disbelief. You were not engaged? No, a painful silence filled the room again. Emily laughed once under her breath, but there was no happiness in it. That is almost funny. Daniel leaned forward slowly. Emily, I never stopped looking for you. Tears gathered in her eyes instantly. Please do not say that now. It is true. Emily shook her head as if hearing those words hurt more than silence ever could. You cannot say things like that after 6 years. Daniel's voice lowered. Then tell me how to fix this. Emily looked at him for a long moment before whispering the one thing he was not prepared to hear. You cannot. Daniel's chest tightened immediately. What does that mean? Emily hesitated before reaching toward the medical bracelet around her wrist. My condition is getting worse. The doctor said treatment could help. Emily smiled sadly. Treatment costs money and time. Daniel almost laughed in disbelief. Emily, money is not even part of this conversation anymore. It is for me, she whispered. Do you know how many nights I stayed awake trying to decide between medication and rent? Daniel looked away instantly, overwhelmed by guilt. Emily continued softly. I did not call you because I needed saving. I called because Noah deserves someone if I cannot. Her voice broke completely before she could finish the sentence. Stop. Daniel moved closer to the bed immediately. Do not talk like that. Emily finally looked directly at him, and Daniel saw years of fear hiding behind her eyes. Every time I got sicker, I kept thinking about Noah growing up alone. Tears rolled silently down her cheeks now. I wrote your name down because no matter what happened between us, I knew you would love him if you knew the truth. Daniel felt something inside him break at those words. After everything she suffered, Emily still trusted him with the most important part of her life. Before he could respond, the door opened quietly and Noah stepped back into the room holding 2 paper cups of hot chocolate. He stopped when he noticed Emily crying. Mom! Emily wiped her eyes quickly and forced a smile, but Noah already looked frightened. He climbed onto the bed beside her and wrapped his small arms around her carefully. Then he looked at Daniel with tears forming in his own eyes. Is my mom dying? The room became completely silent after Noah's question. Emily closed her eyes briefly as if hearing those words from her son hurt more than anything else she had endured. Daniel immediately moved closer to the bed and crouched down in front of Noah so they were eye level. Hey, he said gently. Your mom is sick, but there are doctors helping her. Noah looked unconvinced. But people at school say hospitals are where people go when they are dying. Daniel felt his chest tighten. No 6-year-old should have to carry fears like this. Hospitals are also where people go to get better, Daniel answered carefully. Noah looked toward Emily again before whispering, Promise. Daniel glanced up at Emily for a second. Her exhausted eyes were filled with quiet heartbreak. Then he looked back at Noah. I promise I am going to do everything I can for her. Noah studied his face carefully, as if deciding whether adults could really be trusted. After a moment, he nodded once and leaned against Emily's side again. Daniel stood slowly, but inside something had already changed. 4 years his life revolved around boardrooms, investors, acquisitions, and headlines. Every decision had been about growth, power, and control. Yet standing inside that small hospital room beside the woman he loved and the son he never knew existed, none of those things felt important anymore. Early the next morning, Daniel walked into the private office of Mercy General's chief medical administrator. Within 20 minutes he had arranged consultations with the best specialists in Chicago, transferred Emily into a private recovery suite, and personally guaranteed every expense connected to her treatment. The administrator looked stunned while reviewing the paperwork. Mr. Whitmore, this level of care is extremely expensive. Daniel signed the final page without hesitation. Then send me the bill. But money alone did not fix what truly mattered. Later that afternoon, Daniel returned to Emily's room carrying a small paper bag from a bakery across the street. The smell of fresh cinnamon rolls immediately filled the room. Noah's eyes widened. Mom says rich people do not buy breakfast themselves. Daniel smiled faintly. Your mom says a lot of things about rich people. For the first time in days, Emily laughed softly beneath the blankets. The sound caught Daniel off guard because he realized how much he missed hearing it. Noah sat beside Daniel near the window while eating breakfast, occasionally asking random questions about skyscrapers, airplanes, and business meetings. Daniel answered every single one patiently. At one point Noah tilted his head and asked, Did you know about me before yesterday? Daniel looked down at the untouched coffee in his hands. No, Noah frowned slightly. Would you have come sooner if you knew? Daniel answered immediately. I would have come the second I found out. Noah seemed satisfied with that answer. Across the room, Emily quietly wiped tears from her eyes when she thought nobody noticed. That evening, Daniel stepped outside into the hallway to take a call from his mother. The second he answered, Victoria Whitmore's cold voice filled the line. I heard you canceled the merger meeting. Daniel stared through the hospital windows at the dark Chicago skyline. You knew Emily was pregnant. Silence. Then his mother responded calmly. I did what was necessary to protect your future. Daniel's jaw tightened instantly. You stole 6 years from me. I saved your career, Victoria replied sharply. You would not have the empire you built now if… Daniel interrupted her for the first time in his life. If building this empire cost me my family, then none of it was worth it. He ended the call before she could answer. When Daniel returned to Emily's room, he found Noah asleep against his shoulder beneath a warm blanket, while Emily watched them quietly from the hospital bed. For a moment nobody spoke. Then Emily whispered the words Daniel never expected to hear again. You already look like a father. 1 year later, the first snow of December drifted quietly across downtown Chicago as Daniel Whitmore stood outside an elementary school, holding a paper cup of coffee in one hand and a small pair of gloves in the other. The sharp winter air carried the sound of children laughing somewhere beyond the parking lot, while parents waited near the entrance wrapped in scarves and heavy coats. A year ago, Daniel would have been inside a corporate meeting worrying about quarterly reports and international investors. Now he found himself checking the time every 30 seconds because Noah's class was getting out late. His phone buzzed with messages from executives asking about a delayed merger decision, but Daniel silenced it without even reading them. Some things simply mattered more now. The school doors finally opened and Noah came running outside wearing a blue winter jacket that looked slightly too big for him. Dad! Daniel smiled instantly as the boy nearly crashed into him. Even after a year, hearing that word still affected him in ways he could not explain. Noah grinned proudly while holding up a paper snowflake covered in glitter. Mine won first place in class. Daniel examined it seriously. This belongs in a museum. Noah laughed. You say that about everything I make. Because everything you make is important to me. Noah looked pleased before suddenly glancing behind Daniel. Mom is here too. Daniel turned and saw Emily walking slowly across the sidewalk carrying a container of hot chocolate. For a brief moment he simply stared at her. The dark circles beneath her eyes were finally gone. Her blonde hair moved gently in the wind, and color had returned to her face after nearly a year of treatment and recovery. She looked healthy again. Alive. Daniel still thanked God for that every single morning. Emily smiled softly as she approached them. I think your son inherited your dramatic compliments. Daniel took the hot chocolate from her hand carefully. Our son, he corrected quietly. Emily's expression softened immediately. Small moments like that still mattered to her more than Daniel realized. The past year had not erased their pain overnight. There were difficult conversations, therapy appointments, trust issues, and scars neither of them could fully hide. But somewhere between hospital visits, school pickups, late-night conversations, and rebuilding a life together piece by piece, they found something stronger than what they lost before. They found honesty. Noah reached for both of their hands while walking toward the car. Mrs. Parker says families should take Christmas photos together. Daniel looked at Emily with a faint smile. That sounds dangerously official. Emily laughed quietly. I think we can survive one photo. Noah rolled his eyes dramatically. You two flirt too much. Daniel nearly choked on his coffee while Emily burst into laughter beside him. For the first time in years, everything felt warm instead of lonely. Later that evening, snow continued falling outside the apartment Daniel bought overlooking Lake Michigan. Not because it was luxurious, but because Emily once mentioned she always dreamed of watching snow over the water at night. Noah slept on the couch beneath Christmas lights while an old black and white movie played softly in the background. Emily stood quietly near the window wrapped in one of Daniel's sweaters. Daniel walked over and handed her a small velvet box. Emily looked confused. Daniel? I know we lost years, he said softly. And I know I cannot erase what happened. But if you let me, I want every year we have left to belong to us. Emily opened the box slowly and covered her mouth as tears filled her eyes. Inside was the same engagement ring she returned 6 years earlier before disappearing from his life. Daniel took a careful breath. This time, nobody gets to decide our future except us. Emily looked toward Noah sleeping peacefully beneath the Christmas lights before turning back to Daniel. Then, with tears slipping down her cheeks and snow falling softly beyond the windows, she whispered the word he had waited 6 years to hear. Yes,